This is a re-release of my current most popular video, which kind of exploded on YouTube, but I realized some information I shared on it was incorrect or misleading. Unfortunately, I can't just update a video on YouTube, so for the sake of the integrity of this channel, I decided to pull that video and now update with this new one, which is pretty much the same, except I'll interrupt in a few spots to clarify or fix some things. All right, here we go. This could literally change how Christian apologists talk about manuscripts of the New Testament. I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating for the sake of this video. I really do think the results of this multi-month long project could shake things up, showing in a fresh new way why we can trust that the original writings of the New Testament have not changed, but are preserved for us across history. This is exciting, guys. New research is out. Personally, I've never seen anything quite like this, and I've had the privilege of being involved in a small part of its story. For me, this all began when I encountered a problem with how Christian apologists discuss the preservation of the New Testament. Typically, it starts when someone like a skeptic says, "We don't have the original writings of the Bible, so we don't know what the Bible really says." In response, we tend to say, "Yes, we do not have the original writings of the Bible, but we have manuscripts or handwritten copies of the Bible. In fact, we have thousands of these manuscripts that we compare with each other to help us determine what the original would have said." The skeptic responds by saying, "Sure, but most of those thousands of manuscripts you're so excited about are over 1,000 years after the original books were written. That's a lot of time for corruption to creep in." The apologist says, "True, but we do have early manuscripts that go back close to the time of the original writings. In fact, our earliest manuscript, P52, was written around 130 AD. That's like only 50 years after the books of the Bible were written." 130 AD is an early estimate. A lot of scholars think that the manuscript actually was written quite a bit later in that century. And the skeptic responds, rightfully so, saying, "Sure, but P52, like all of our other earliest manuscripts, is just a fragment. It's not the whole New Testament." That is a totally valid concern. Early manuscripts are great, but early manuscripts also tend to be fragments. Maybe just a page, maybe half a page, or even smaller. It's still counted as a manuscript. What any skeptic wants to know, and what any Christian should want to know, is this: do we have enough useful data across all of our earliest manuscripts to reconstruct what the original New Testament would have said? That's the problem I encountered. Now, we know that the earliest complete copy of the New Testament is the Codex Sinaiticus, created in the mid-4th century. The Codex Vaticanus is another hugely important manuscript. It dates to the early 4th century and has most of the New Testament. That's a great start. The average manuscript lasts maybe 100 or 200 years, so anything before the 400s might be only a couple of generations removed from the original. But can we go earlier? About a year ago, I spoke to a guy I work with, Nick Alsop, and I said, "Hey, I know there's a good handful of New Testament manuscripts written prior to 400 AD, but apart from the Sinaiticus and the Vaticanus, I don't know how much of the New Testament is actually in those manuscripts. Could you research that?" Nick said, "Sure." And he quickly discovered that there was no easy answer to that question, so he began figuring it out himself. He went full out, guys, doing way more work than I expected. He began examining all the manuscripts from before 400 AD and identified which New Testament verses are preserved in each of those manuscripts. Keep in mind, the New Testament has over 7,900 verses in total. So here he is with this huge spreadsheet, checkboxing each of those verses that exist for all of the manuscripts. It's nuts. It's taking him months, but then Nick ends up connecting with another guy, Dwayne Green. Dwayne is a moderator of the NT Textual Criticism group on Facebook. He has a YouTube channel talking about this stuff, and so you can check that out. And apparently, he's been working on a similar project as Nick, but he was focused only on the papyrus manuscripts because reasons. So Nick and Dwayne start working together, doing all the manuscript stuff prior to 400 AD, but also there's papyrus data going up to around 800 AD because of Dwayne's work. And Dwayne is kind of a genius in Excel, so he managed to create a formula that displays a visual graph for each book of the New Testament, which dynamically changes according to the date range you select. It's so good. Let's take a look. Okay, so here's the spreadsheet. And the way it's set up now is to show us the percentage of each book of the New Testament represented by any manuscript whose earliest estimated date of creation is between 0 and 100 AD. A lot of people were asking why I didn't use the middle date. The main reason was that I didn't have that available to me at the time of creating this video. The spreadsheet has since been updated, making it possible to check for the middle date, and in hindsight, I wish I would have warned my listeners that checking for the earliest possible date could be misleading because it's the best case scenario. If that was confusing, let me try again. Each manuscript of the New Testament is dated with an estimate, and that estimate is a window of time. For instance, maybe a manuscript of Romans is estimated to have been written between 5 and 600 AD. Another issue that I wish I noticed was that when I'm doing numbers like 0 to 100, the earliest possible dates for some manuscripts might be, for example, 100 to 200. And because I have 100 in there, that means those second century manuscripts are being pulled back into my search for 0 to 100. That's problematic because it brings a ton of manuscripts into a century that I'm really not looking for. I'll show you some updated results with some better searches as we move along in this video. Previously, I mentioned that the earliest manuscript is a fragment of John written around 130 AD. However, the dating is not exact, and so the official date range of this manuscript of John shows that it could have been written even prior to 100 AD. The same is true for a manuscript of Matthew, and that's why you see John and Matthew showing up in this chart. Yeah, because of how I ran the search, it would be better to realize that there's probably nothing going on in the first century as far as manuscripts are concerned. The fragment of John contains 1.37% of all the verses in the book of John, and the fragment of Matthew covers about 2% of all the verses of Matthew. So, there's not much happening in the first century. This shouldn't surprise us. Books of the Bible are still being written, right? But look what happens when we bump up to the beginning of the second century. Holy freaking cow. Suddenly, we have manuscript data covering the flagship books of Paul and Peter, the Gospel of John, over 2/3 of Luke, Hebrews. Okay, so yeah, this data is not right because of the mistakes I made in entering information. But if you take the updated spreadsheet now and check for the median dates of the manuscripts, the middle date, as well as entering the numbers correctly, which you're kind of forced to do now, what you'll find is that the results are pretty much similar, except, and this is a big difference, is that they're pushed back about 100 years. So when I'm talking about the second century, think third century. When I'm talking about the third century, think fourth century. Ultimately, for me, this doesn't lower my excitement for the results of the study a whole lot. And a big reason is because even that early is quite remarkable. Some people seem to have unrealistically high expectations for what they think is necessary in order to accurately reconstruct ancient texts based off of their manuscripts. But as I shared a little earlier in this video, we're only maybe a couple generations removed from the originals, and I have other videos where I talk about this stuff a little more. But that's a really important change that I want you to realize, okay? So let's keep going. But look down in this corner. We have over half of the entire New Testament represented in manuscripts whose composition could be as early as the first 200 years. Let's bump that up to 300 AD. Now it's 81%. All of the Gospels are entirely represented. That's huge, since the Gospels are the writings that discuss the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. There's not much movement on some of the other books, but some of those dips are for books that are also really short, so it's not all that surprising. You may have noticed that 2 Timothy is missing from this list entirely. The reason is because we just don't have early manuscripts of 2 Timothy, unfortunately. And without any data for 2 Timothy here, the way that the spreadsheet is programmed is it just doesn't even populate the name unless there's some data for it in some century. I'm currently talking with Dwayne to make 2 Timothy still be visible, just so we can see it, and see even that it's not where we would like it to be. Climbing up to 400 AD, this is what I originally wanted to know. It climbs a bit more. Now, technically, at this point, pretty much everything should be maxed out because now we are within the date range of the Sinaiticus and Vaticanus codices. And yes, that would include 2 Timothy. For this project, though, we didn't include those manuscripts because that ruins the fun. Here's a better representation of where we're at realistically with the median dates and also the years set as they ought to be. As you can see, the first century, nothing really going on. The second century, it's just beginning. Third century, now we're seeing action. And then the fourth century, fifth century, again, this is just like what you had seen, but pushed back 100 years. All right. Currently, this document has papyrus data going even further. That wouldn't be all the manuscripts. Nick still plans on filling out the later dates with non-papyri manuscripts, but we can see what happens if we say bump this up to 600 AD, which is still pretty early for manuscripts, mind you. The book of Acts catches up, James, the letters of John. Anyway, I hope you can see the value in a project like this. Because of this work, we can visually see the amount of data in our earliest New Testament manuscripts, and we find these manuscripts cover some of the most critical books for anyone trying to determine if Christianity is true. Again, my excitement for this study hasn't really changed, even with the 100-year difference that I had mistakenly displayed. But things are still moving fast, and I would encourage you to check the comments because I'll pin a comment at the top, which I may update occasionally as needed to make even more corrections if that's necessary, or just share some more information that might be helpful for you all. Dwayne, Nick, and I are happy to share our work in progress, so you can explore the document yourself if you'd like. Just make sure you're on the right tab, percent attestation. I'll drop a link in the comments. I've done some other videos of manuscripts of the Bible too, so you'll see a link for that in the comments too. And again, check out Dwayne's channel on YouTube. He does some good work there. Cool. Well, hey, before you check out, little channel update. The past 10 videos or so were pre-recorded before I started philosophy at Talbot School of Theology. This summer, I'm back at it, making another batch of videos to keep this channel purring until I graduate at the end of this year. This is my first video of the batch. That's why I'm in a new place, as you can see. So I'm back at it. Several videos in line represent some of the work I've been doing studying philosophy under the likes of J.P. Moreland, Scott Ray, and other fantastic professors here. So buckle in. We've got some deeper dives coming up, but as always, I'll try to simplify things as best I can. I'm excited. Do not miss out. Subscribe with the bell and all that. You know the drill. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.